So, after reviewing a brand spanking new game last time, I figured I'd balance things out by taking a look at what I think is the oldest game I've covered so far. Actually, that's not entirely true. I'd planned to make a video on this game before I discovered I'd be able to get my hands on Final Fantasy VII Remake ahead of a lot of the world, but I want to at least pretend I'm not just picking games at random. Although I definitely am. Anyway, this week's random, very well thought out and meticulously planned game is Golvellius. If you haven't heard of Golvellius, and that's a definite possibility, it's not quite as well remembered as many other games of the era, it can be summed up pretty succinctly as Sega's answer to The Legend of Zelda. Well, I say it was Sega's answer, but apparently it was first released on the MSX in 1987, a year after Zelda, with the enhanced Master System version coming another year after that. As usual, these details were lost on me when I first played the Master System version as a kid. I didn't know what an MSX was, and I still pretty much don't. More shamefully, I didn't know what Zelda was either. I was more than a decade away from actually owning a Nintendo console, and still firmly entrenched on the Sega side of the console wars. And possibly that's for the best. I loved Golvellius back in the day, but I think it's fair to say that if I'd been able to compare it with The Legend of Zelda, I might not have enjoyed it so much. The plot is traditional and forgettable fantasy stuff. A princess, whose name is definitely not Zelda, has been imprisoned by a bad guy whose name is certainly not Ganon, and it's up to a young hero, whose name is certainly not Link, to go save her. I honestly, legitimately cannot remember the names of the princess or the hero at this moment, and the only reason I can remember the name of the bad guy is that it's the name of the whole damn game, i.e. Golvellius. Suffice it to say, there's not much character development happening here. So, Kalesis, and yes, that's the hero's name, I thought I'd better put in the minimum of effort and check the manual, sets off to the optimistically named Valley of Doom to rescue Princess Rena. See, I put in more than the minimum of effort and checked her name too. I must be the most thorough YouTuber on the planet. Kalesis enters a cave and is given a sword by an old woman who essentially tells him it's dangerous to go alone, so he should take this. That might remind you of a certain other game, but this is absolutely not like Zelda, because this is an old woman, not an old man. Plus, she gives Kalesis a pair of boots as well. The boots do literally nothing, but, you know, they look comfortable. And then, okay, this bit isn't too much like Zelda, at least not the first one. There's a bit of variety to the gameplay in Golvellius, for better or worse, mostly worse. You've got side-scrolling sections like this, top-down forced scrolling sections, and then there's the main Zelda-esque top-down overworld. And I have to say, the first two of these are not great. There's precisely zero challenge to these side-scrolling sections, and almost nothing of interest within them. These giant snakes are kind of cool. I like the simple but characterful cartoony design of them, but all they do is jump up and down and spit out smaller snakes. Which isn't exactly the height of realism, but hey, there are snake species that give birth to live young, and young snakes are famously dangerous from the moment they've hatched, or, in this case, been flung headfirst at a green-haired munchkin. Before long you emerge into the wider world, and this is where the meat of the game resides. Which is good, because this is easily the most successful part of the whole gameplay experience. The graphics are appealingly colourful, and the enemy designs are, well, they're not particularly sophisticated even for the time, but they're varied and kind of charming in their own way. And as I've said more than once, any game that had elements of non-linearity and open areas that you could explore at your leisure were always appealing to me. This game certainly does encourage, or indeed require, exploration. The world design is probably its best feature, as you're slowly introduced to larger environments with more complexity. This is one of those games where making a hand-drawn map can be a useful side activity, and an enjoyable one, if you're into that sort of thing, which I absolutely was as a kid. The gameplay, though, is almost painfully simple. You can move and you can swing your sword. In the side-scrolling sections you can jump and duck. That's literally it. You can acquire items that increase your defense, let you do more damage, and eventually allow you to walk over almost everything, but you'll never gain access to more abilities. Crucially, you never gain a ranged attack of any sort, which is something that I really think this game could have benefited from. The overarching gameplay loop is also pretty damn simple, although occasional complications are thrown into the mix. Basically, you have to track down the lair of the boss of each area, go through either a top-down or side-scrolling section, kill the boss, and thereby gain access to the next area, and the process repeats. To do all these things, you need to find the entrances to the vast number of caves this valley apparently has. Every screen has one, but the way to open them up varies. Some just start off open. Some require you to hit a certain object with your sword. Killing the boss of an area always opens up a cave that wasn't previously accessible, which contains a wise woman who will sell you a crystal, 7 of which are required to access the final boss. The majority, though, open up only once you've dispatched a certain number of foes on that screen. So you'll find yourself falling into a somewhat monotonous procedure, going from screen to screen, killing enemies, whacking random things with your sword, hoping to find the boss's lair, or at least something that will help you progress. If you're lucky, you'll find a wise woman who will sell you a potion that increases your maximum health, or a Bible that increases the amount of gold you can carry. I'm not entirely sure what Bibles have to do with your ability to carry large amounts of gold. I'd like to think it's a sly commentary on the ways in which religion has been used to extort wealth from the faithful, but I think that might be giving the game a bit too much credit. Maybe instead of piggy banks, this world has Bible banks. I don't know. There are also caves that contain Randa, who restores your health for a small fee, and Eni, who restores a smaller amount of health for a smaller fee. Most caves, though, contain a fairy, and you'll really come to despise these little vixens. Maybe 1 in 20 of them will give you a vaguely helpful clue, like telling you that the boss's lair is near a river, or you need to hit a gravestone to find a better sword. The other 95% of the time they'll give you some random irrelevant bit of nonsense that's always pointless, and can be downright infuriating if you just fought your way through a pack of dangerous foes to reach them. Didst thou see anything interesting, you ask? Well, yes, I did, if you count the hordes of snakes, spiders and ravenous crows I had to fight my way through to get here. Now I'm on low health and death is imminent. Fortunately, death isn't too much of a hindrance. When you die, you lose half your gold and go back to the starting point of the entire game. That might sound like kind of a harsh punishment, but the game is structured in such a way that once you've defeated a boss in an area, it opens up paths and other forms of access that mean you don't have to make too much of a trek to get back to where you were. The complexity of the game builds fairly gradually. This first area consists of only 9 screens, so you can't really get lost, and finding the first boss's lair isn't much of a struggle. The path to this boss takes the form of a top-down 4-scrolling section, and I'd rate these sections as the weakest part of the game. There's no real skill to them, you just hack away at the bats and hope that the path you chose doesn't end in a dead end. If that happens and the edge of the screen catches up to you, you're sent back to the start of the section, which isn't the end of the world, but it is highly irritating to have to redo the whole thing just because you randomly chose the wrong direction. I get that it's a way to inject a bit of longevity into the game, it forces you to memorise the right path, and when I was a kid I didn't mind. Now though, I don't have the patience for stuff like that. It's not an issue in this first top-down section, but it sure as hell is an issue later on. The first boss itself is a kind of abominable snowman who moves from side to side with what might be a poorly animated MC Hammer shuffle. It throws out snowflakes and is incredibly easily beaten. Woo. With him out of the way, the next area is accessible. It's a good bit larger than the first area, at least twice the size, but it's still pretty easy to navigate. There's at least one fairy here who'll give you some useful advice about hitting a blue rock to find the boss's lair. The others, though, not so useful. The path to the second boss is a side-scrolling section, through a cave that has miraculously been carved out in such a way that it spells out the name of a popular video game manufacturer, and also a word of encouragement for our intrepid hero. Isn't nature grand? The second boss isn't so grand. It rolls at you, you move out of the way, you stab it repeatedly in the face, it dies. Woo! So on to the next area, which is where some of the flaws in the gameplay begin to shine through. The thing is, the actual controls aren't super sharp. It can feel kind of sluggish to move the Khaleesi around and avoid enemies while slicing away at them. It doesn't matter too much in the open areas where there's plenty of room to maneuver, but this third zone features restrictive paths surrounded by impassable briars, or whatever they are. This makes exploration rather more frustrating, especially on screens with enemies that aren't impeded by the vegetation in the same way you are. Add to this the fact that, even if you've upgraded your health a few times, enemies are doing proportionately more damage, and it's not surprising that this is the stage where I started dying a lot more frequently. This is also the stage where another questionable gameplay element comes to the fore: gold farming. You really need the next sword upgrade if you want to survive what lies ahead, but that costs a lot of gold, more gold in fact than you can probably carry at this point. So you need to buy more Bibles. But the Bibles themselves can cost a fair bit too, and you probably want to buy all the health upgrades you can get your hands on. So the majority of your playtime from this point on will be spent finding the best place to farm gold, preferably a screen with relatively easy to kill enemies and not too far from a place you can heal up when needed, and then mindlessly stabbing enemies again until you have enough gold to buy the next Bible, or potion, or upgrade, or whatever. Again, this is something that didn't bother me much as a kid. Mindlessly stabbing 8-bit sprites was basically my perfect Saturday, but it's a bit tiresome now. I mean, it's not that bad, we're not talking MMO levels of tedious farming, but there are things I'd rather be doing. Well, with the tedious farming out of the way, it's time to face the third boss. The top-down scrolling section here is where you start to get kicked out if you happen to select the wrong path, which isn't fun. The boss itself is a scary-looking triple-headed winged demon thing, but if you've taken the time to collect all the upgrades so far, you don't really need to worry about its fireballs. You can just follow it around and reduce its health to 0 before it can do the same to you. The next zone. Oh man, I distinctly remember getting stuck here when I was a kid. I just could not find the boots that let you walk over water. Eventually I got so frustrated I gave up and loaned the game to a friend. Then, when he found the boots, I immediately demanded that he give the game back. He was pretty pissed off, and I can understand why, but this is an ethical dilemma that has haunted me to this day. Okay, that may be going a bit far. But I'm still undecided as to whether I acted truly unethically. It was my game after all, did I not have the right to do with it as I saw fit? On the other hand, it would definitely have been the polite thing to do to at least let him have the chance to progress further in the game. If you have an opinion on this petty childhood squabble from 30 years ago, let me know in the comments. Anyway, I managed to get stuck here again 3 decades later, and for what I suspect was exactly the same reason. There's a fairy that tells you you need to find the Ring of Invisibility, which is in the swamp somewhere. So that's what I try to do, for a long time. I figure, hey, it's the Ring of Invisibility, maybe it's hidden in some particularly obscure way. You can actually access a beachside area to the west, but the monsters there are significantly tougher, and the fairy specifically told me to find the ring in the swamp, so I discount that as an option. That, of course, is a mistake. Yes, you need to go to the beach, avoid the deadly enemies along the way, and find the wise woman who will sell you, not the ring, but boots that allow you to walk on water, Jesus style. Maybe that's what all the Bibles were leading up to, a surprise twist, where it turns out you're not just here to save the princess, you're the saviour of all mankind. Or not. With the boots in hand, or on foot, now you can go back to the swamp and fight the next boss. Turns out you don't even need the Ring of Invisibility yet. There's slightly more challenge to this boss, her projectiles move unpredictably and do decent damage, but she's not too tough. And then finally you can get the elusive Ring of Invisibility. Except, according to the manual, it's actually called the Ring of Invincibility. Not that it matters, because the ring makes you neither invisible nor invincible. Instead, bafflingly, it gives you the power to shatter the grey rocks that litter the landscape, an ability that's necessary to progress much further. So it's back to the beach. Now you can walk on water, there's a lot more to discover here, but a lot of it is featureless open ocean, so it can get slightly confusing, but probably only if you're already chronically slightly confused like me. The best part of this zone is the one area with the red jellies, which are relatively easy to kill and give you quite a lot of gold. It's probably the best place to farm gold until late in the game, so you'll spend quite a bit of time here, soaking up the 8-bit atmosphere. The pre-boss scrolling sections are getting longer and more irritating, but in this case it's the boss itself that is the most difficult part of the area. Unlike the previous bosses, where you could basically just walk up to them and cut them down to size, here you need to exercise some patience, and patience is not one of my key skills, so I die. A lot. In truth, these guys aren't all that tough if you're willing to take your time and wait for an opening. Which I am not, at least not until I've been beaten down long enough to accept that if I'm ever going to see the end of this game, I'm going to have to play a bit smarter. It takes a Herculean effort to rein in my urge to just run around smacking their rocky asses, but eventually I managed to kill them. Woo! And, well, there's really not much that's new or interesting to talk about from here through to the end of the game. The next zone is a rather pleasant forested area that's quite tough to navigate thanks to the twisting paths, and the zone after that is very much the same, except even larger and tougher to navigate. This is where the notion of a hand-drawn map becomes very appealing indeed. Of course, the internet makes that kind of unnecessary. There are plenty of maps out there ready for the taking, but that'd be kind of cheating. In the end, I go for the lazy but ultimately least efficient option of wandering around aimlessly until I get a vague idea of the layout in my head and randomly find the places I need to go. There's a new, more powerful sword to be found, which of course means more gold farming and more Bible acquisition. I swear, by now I must have more Bibles than that Gideon guy who keeps leaving his everywhere. Fortunately, a new, more lucrative form of the jellies have appeared, so significantly more than half my time in this late game stage is spent slaughtering them. Lo, I am become Death, destroyer of jellies. The best upgrade though is the final pair of boots. These allow you to walk over almost everything, which makes the game a damn sight more pleasant to play. With these in hand, on foot, I've already done that joke, haven't I? You can wander the world at your leisure, pick up whatever upgrades you might have missed, and then delve into the lair of the final boss. The final side-scrolling section is long and boring. There's no danger of dying here. For whatever reason, the damage done by the enemies in these sections doesn't scale up as you get more powerful. The only threat is choosing the wrong passageway, finding yourself at a dead end and having to restart the section. Yes, even in the side-scrolling bits, you're not safe from this major frustration. But after a potentially painful amount of time, you'll make it to the final boss, the eponymous Golvellius. And as far as the bosses in this game go, it's actually not that bad. The fight's very simple, but also kind of challenging. The boss lunges towards you, then slows down, and then shoots fire down the screen. You have a small window of opportunity to move in, get off a couple of attacks, and then move out before he lunges again. It's not complicated stuff, but it's pleasingly satisfying to get the timing down. And once you've done that, and Golvellius succumbs to your sword strikes, the ending sequence plays. Turns out Golvellius isn't such a bad guy after all. In fact, the game sequel baits pretty hard by telling you that Golvellius, Khaleesi, and Princess What's-Her-Face are embarking on a quest to find Khaleesi's heretofore unmentioned long-lost sister. And while there was a remake for the MSX2 a year later, the world still waits for Golvellius 2. Which is kind of a shame. This game isn't really a classic, but to a Zelda-deprived kid such as I was, it was a highlight amongst the Master System's library, and I think a sequel that built on the original, gave the protagonist some more abilities, and gave you some more things to do other than farm gold, might have been highly successful. As it is, Golvellius is a pleasant enough way to pass some time. Its world is well designed and fun to explore for the most part, and I genuinely like the visuals, at least in the overworld. They're simple but colourful, and remain for me highly evocative of the 8-bit days. The scrolling sections aren't so great however, although I still like the giant snake. Well, thanks for watching. Please consider hitting the like button or even subscribing if you feel like it. Every bit of positive feedback helps my fragile ego survive to fight another day. Until next time then, get off my lawn.